My parents hadn't answered the phone for a week. When I went to their house, everything was destroyed. I was about to call the police when I heard a noise coming from the closet. My heart stopped. Inside was, "This isn't just a story, it's a raw wound, a gaping hole in my life that started with a frantic phone call and ended in unspeakable horror." I drove back to my childhood home that day, a chilling dread clutching my gut, but nothing could have prepared me for the chaos I found behind that slightly ajar front door. A silent house, a shattered life, and the terrified eyes of my nephew, Jaden, hiding in a wardrobe, unveiled a truth so brutal it ripped my world apart. My name is Jackson Palmer, and I'm 31 now, managing a busy hotel in the shimmering chaos of Las Vegas. From the outside, my life looks stable. Good job, a quiet apartment, a schedule that keeps me from overthinking. But mention my family, mention Reno, and you'll see the cracks. A different story emerges, one filled with lingering pain, unspoken love, and a shadow named Dylan. Reno, a small town nestled in Nevada's mountains, was my childhood. Everyone knew everyone. Life moved at a slow, predictable pace. My parents, Joseph and Marilyn, were the backbone of that town, honest, simple folk who poured their hearts into everything they did. They owned Palmer's Grocery, a modest, weathered store with a faded wooden sign. I practically grew up there, bagging groceries, stocking shelves. The scent of fresh bread mixed with the old wood floor, it was my entire world back then. Our home was just a few blocks away, a two-story house with a perpetually weedy front yard and an old oak tree I used to climb every summer. That's where I learned to tie my shoes, where I heard my mother's lullabies, where I saw their smiles and their tears. But we weren't a perfectly happy family. There was always a looming presence, a shadow named Dylan, my younger brother. Dylan was 5 years my junior, but from day one, he was the center of our universe. Mom called him her golden boy. With his curly hair and sparkling eyes, Dylan had a smile that could melt anyone. And my parents, especially my mother, absolutely couldn't resist him. They spoiled him rotten, showering him with new toys, nice clothes, and instant forgiveness for every misstep. Me? I was the older brother, expected to be mature, responsible. Dylan was allowed to live carefree, his mistakes just harmless pranks. I don't blame my parents. I know they loved us both, just differently. I remember cleaning up at the store late, knowing Dylan was out for ice cream with Mom. Or getting yelled at for breaking a glass, while Dylan could spill an entire tray of pastries and only get a pat on the head. These small things, piling up over the years, created a chasm between us. We were parallel lines, living under the same roof but never truly connecting. At 18, I escaped Reno for college in Las Vegas. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, live for myself. I studied business, landed a hotel job, and slowly built a new life. But every return to Reno felt like stepping back into a heavy fog. Dylan, now a teenager, was changing. His angelic smile had twisted into defiance, recklessness. He started skipping school, hanging out with a bad crowd. And then, like an inevitable storm, he fell into gambling. Gambling in Nevada is everywhere, but for Dylan, it wasn't a pastime, it was an addiction. I still remember the first time Mom called, her voice trembling, saying Dylan had stolen money from the store's safe. I drove back that night to find Dad silent in his chair, Mom sobbing in the kitchen. Dylan? He just shrugged. I'll pay it back. No big deal. But he never did. The debts piled up. He married Sutton, a woman I hoped might pull him out of the abyss. But their marriage lasted less than 2 years. Sutton left, taking a piece of our family with her, leaving Dylan and their 3-year-old son, Jaden. Instead of stepping up, Dylan abandoned Jaden, leaving him with my parents while he drifted, only appearing to beg for money, cause trouble, and disappear again. Jaden, now 6, is the one light. Every time I visit Reno, I spend time with him, telling stories, sitting on the porch. He has Dylan's eyes from when he was young, but so much purer, so innocent. He calls me Uncle Jack and hugs me tight when I leave. But even Jaden can't erase the growing distance between me and my parents. Our relationship had fractured. I love them deeply. But their favoritism toward Dylan and the burdens they placed on me to fix his messes had worn me down. Every time Mom called, I braced myself for another rant about Dylan, his debts, his trouble. Each call left me drained, helpless. Last month, her calls became more frequent, her voice frail, filled with worry. Dylan came by again, she said. He demanded money, brought some strangers with him. I don't know what to do. I told her to call the police, but she just sighed. He's my son. I can't do that. I hung up, my heart heavy. She never would. I thought about going back, confronting Dylan, even bringing Jaden to live with me. But work swept me away, and I told myself everything would be fine. My parents could handle it. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. For a whole week, this creeping unease settled over me, like a cold wind through the scorching Vegas summer. My calls to Mom and Dad went unanswered, just endless ringing echoing in an empty void. Texts with simple questions: Mom, are you okay? Dad, what are you up to? How's Jaden? Met only silence. At first, I rationalized it. Busy at the store, dead phones. But as the third day passed, then the fifth, that unease turned into a raging storm in my chest. I clutched my phone every night, scrolling through unanswered messages, my heart heavy. I pictured Dad, his tall frame, eyes always quiet with exhaustion, but steadfast patience. Mom, her gentle smile, her voice growing weaker with every mention of Dylan. And Jaden, the 6-year-old with big, round eyes, probably clutching his worn teddy bear in that Reno house. What was going on? Mom's frantic calls about Dylan showing up with strangers haunted me. He wasn't just asking for money anymore. He'd changed, become aggressive, reckless. She'd said he'd bang on the door in the middle of the night, yelling for money to pay debts. Once, he even threatened to make a big deal if they didn't comply. I wanted to race back then, grab Dylan by the collar, scream that he had no right to torment them. But I held back. I told myself I couldn't keep cleaning up his messes forever. My biggest mistake was thinking I could stay on the sidelines, let my parents face the storm alone. By the 7th day, with still no response, a call from an unfamiliar number made my heart pound. It was Mrs. Helen, the neighbor across from my parents' store. Her voice was frantic, laced with worry. Jackson, I need to tell you something. Your parents' store has been closed all week. No one's seen them. Something's not right, Jackson. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The grocery store, where my parents had poured their lives, had never been closed for a week, not even for major holidays. This was unimaginable. I hung up, my hands trembling. Maybe they were sick. Maybe a trip. But deep down, I knew those were just flimsy excuses. Dylan. Had he done something? Had he pushed them into a situation they couldn't escape? I couldn't sit still any longer. That evening, I called my boss, requesting emergency leave. I need to go home. It's urgent, I choked. Out, not explaining. My kind but busy boss just nodded over the phone and told me to be careful. I packed a small suitcase, glanced out the window at the twinkling Vegas lights, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. A 7-hour drive to Reno lay ahead. This wasn't just about finding my parents. It was about facing everything I'd avoided for years. Memories flooded back as I started the engine. Afternoons behind the store counter, Dad teaching me to count change, Mom slipping me a peppermint candy. The smell of old wood, the jingle of the bell, Dylan and I playing tag, laughing. But those warm memories couldn't ease the dread suffocating my chest. Every dark stretch of road, I saw Dylan's image, not the boy, but the man with cold eyes, harsh voice, the threats Mom described. What had happened in that house? Was something far worse waiting for me? With every mile, my fear grew, a stone weighing heavier on my heart. I turned on the radio, but no melody could drown out the whisper in my head. Jackson, you've abandoned them for too long. I pressed the gas. The 7-hour drive felt like a lifetime. When Reno's welcome sign came into view, my chest tightened. The town looked the same, familiar streets under the moonlight. But something felt off, a warning in the air. I drove straight to the grocery store. It should have been lit, bustling. Instead, it was completely shuttered. The faded Palmer's grocery sign tilted, weary. Darkness behind the windows, no light, no life. The shelves I'd stocked were swallowed by shadows. My parents would never close the store this long. Never. Unless. I didn't dare finish the thought. I drove to their house. The familiar road that once led to carefree summer days now seemed endless. Every street corner, every old oak tree, stirred memories. Dylan and me running, Mom calling us for dinner, Dad reading the newspaper. But now, those memories only deepened my unease. I didn't want to know what I was about to face, but a dark feeling clung to me, impossible to shake. When I pulled up to the two-story house, my heart seemed to stop. Pitch black. Not a single light. Not a sound. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. My legs heavy as lead, each step felt like it led me toward an abyss. Dad? Mom? Jaden. I called, but only the cold, lifeless wind answered. I pushed the door open, and the sight hit me like a physical blow. The house, once filled with laughter, Mom's cookies, Jaden's stories, was a wreck. Furniture toppled in the living room, as if a storm had torn through it. Kitchen cabinet doors hung open, dishes scattered, some shattered. A long crack ran across the wall. A wooden chair Dad had proudly built lay broken, a leg missing. Everything screamed chaos. A battle. I stood there, blood turning to ice. Dad? Mom? I called again, my voice weak, but the thick silence enveloped me, pressing down on my chest. I stumbled over a spoon. Each step was a knife twisting in my heart, because I knew no one would leave the house like this by accident. Not Dad, who kept everything in order. Not Mom, who polished floors until they gleamed. Certainly not careful Jaden. I tried to gather my thoughts. Robbed? Fled in a panic? Or something worse? I shook my head, pushing the thought away. I needed to find them, to find Jaden. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police. But then, a faint sound from the end of the hallway, from my parents' bedroom. A shaky, labored breath, mixed with soft, stifled sobs. Like a small animal trying to hide. My heart pounded, blood rushing to my ears. I froze, listening. Then it came again, clearer, more desperate. I moved toward the bedroom, my legs trembling. The door was ajar. As I pushed it open, a musty smell and cold silence hit me. My parents' bed was untouched, but the blankets disheveled. Jaden. I called, my voice breaking. Is that you? Where are you? No reply. Only the labored breathing, clearer now, coming from the corner of the room. The sound led me to the old wardrobe, its door slightly open. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, sweat beading on my forehead. I took a deep breath. It's going to be okay, Jackson, I whispered, but deep down I knew nothing was okay. The wardrobe door creaked sharply as I pulled it open, the sound slicing through the silence. Darkness swallowed the faint light from the hallway. Then, amidst jumbled clothes and the musty smell of old wood, I saw a small figure curled up. My eyes strained to adjust. When the light finally fell on him, I froze. It was Jaden, my 6-year-old nephew. Those clear eyes I cherished, but now he was no longer the Jaden I knew. He sat huddled, clutching his tattered teddy bear, the one Mom had given him as a baby. His clothes were crumpled, filthy, as if he'd worn them for a week. His hair was matted, his face gaunt and pale, drained of life by hunger. But what shattered my heart were his eyes, red-rimmed, wide open, gleaming with a fear I'd never seen in a child. He wasn't crying loudly, just soft, choked sobs, as if he'd cried so much he had no strength left. Jaden, I called, my voice breaking, barely recognizable. I knelt, reaching out, but he flinched, shrinking deeper into the corner as if I were a threat. He clutched the teddy bear so tightly I feared it might tear. Jaden, it's Uncle Jack. You're safe now, I said, my voice trembling, trying to stay calm even though my heart was screaming. He didn't respond, just stared, his panicked eyes searching for something to trust, something to hold on to. Slowly, I reached out again, gently touching his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but his body shook violently, like a dry leaf in a cold wind. What happened? Where are Grandma and Grandpa? I asked, fighting back tears. I needed to know why the house was in ruins, why my parents weren't here, why Jaden was hiding like a wounded animal. But Jaden said nothing, just stared, his red eyes wide. And then, as if his last bit of strength gave out, he collapsed into my arms. His small body felt weightless, so frail. I was afraid a tight hug might break him. I held him close, feeling his rapid breaths against my shoulder. In that moment, a pain deeper than anything I'd ever known washed over me. This boy, my beloved nephew, had endured something horrific. And I, who should have protected him, hadn't been there. "It's okay. I'm here now," I whispered, unsure if I was comforting him or myself. I scanned the room again, hoping for a note, a clue, anything. Only silence and chaos. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like an abandoned battlefield. I couldn't stay. Jaden needed help. I had to get him out. I carried him to the car, laid him on the back seat, and wrapped him in a thin blanket I found on the couch. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling faintly as if clinging to life. I jumped into the driver's seat and sped toward the nearest hospital, my heart pounding. The 10-minute drive felt like a century. I kept glancing at Jaden in the rearview mirror, terrified he might slip away. "Hang on, buddy," I muttered, my voice breaking. "I won't let anything happen to you." But in my mind, questions swirled like sharp blades. Where were my parents? What had happened in that house? At the emergency room, I practically shouted for the nurses. "Help my nephew. He's not okay." A team rushed over, wheeling a stretcher to the car. They gently lifted Jaden, and I stood there, helpless, as they whisked him inside. A nurse, her eyes concerned but professional, asked about his condition. I could only shake my head. I don't know. I just found him in a wardrobe. He hasn't said anything. Please save him." Inside, doctors worked quickly, hooking Jaden up to N4, checking his heart rate and blood pressure. I watched through the small window, Jaden lying there, so small and fragile, like a bird with broken wings. A doctor emerged, his face grave. "The boy is severely dehydrated and malnourished, likely from days without food or water. He's also experiencing significant psychological trauma. We'll keep him for observation. But can you tell us anything about what happened?" I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just got home and found him like that." Deep down, I knew I couldn't stop here. Jaden had survived, but what about my parents? The wrecked house. The signs of violence. The eerie silence. I clenched my fists, anger and pain surging like a fire. I had to go back to that house. I called a friend from the hotel, asking him to cover my work. "I don't know how long this will take," I said, my voice hollow. He didn't ask questions, just told me to be careful. I hung up, feeling like I was severing a piece of my normal life in Las Vegas, stepping into a nightmare with no end in sight. Back in the car, I drove to my parents' house. The Reno night was cold, the faint moonlight casting an eerie glow on the familiar streets, making them feel alien. A chill ran down my spine when I pulled up. I stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. The house was as I'd left it, furniture toppled, dishes shattered, the crack on the wall a grim reminder. I stood in the living room, breathing in the heavy air, searching for any clue. I walked through each room, avoiding touching anything. I knew if something serious had occurred, the police would need the scene untouched. In the kitchen, I spotted a family photo frame on the floor. I looked down at the cracked glass, my heart clenching at the sight of my parents' smiles, mine, and even Dylan's from when we were kids. A summer day when we were still a family. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. "I need to report a missing persons case," I said when the dispatcher's voice came through. "My parents. They're not home. And my nephew, I found him in critical condition. The house, it's been ransacked. Please come. Quickly." My voice choked, each word wrenched from deep inside. They told me to wait. I sat on the old sofa, trying to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I scanned the room desperately. Dad's jacket hung on the coat rack, but its pockets were empty. A cold cup of coffee sat on the kitchen table, as if Dad had left mid-sip. Everything screamed a story I couldn't decipher. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside. I heard hurried footsteps, then the door swung open. 3 officers stepped inside, followed by a man in plain clothes. "Are you the one who called, Jackson Palmer?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, standing, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm Detective Matthew. Tell us what you know." I led them through the house, showing them the broken chairs, shattered dishes, the crack on the wall. I told them about not reaching my parents for a week, Mrs. Helen's call, and finding Jaden. Each word felt like a stab, but I forced myself to keep going. Matthew took careful notes, his eyes sharp, non-judgmental. "We'll look into everything," he said, "but first, we need to secure the scene." Officers began cordoning off the house with yellow tape. I stood on the porch, watching as neighbors gathered, their eyes a mix of curiosity and concern. Whispers floated through the crowd. "I heard arguing last week," Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman, told an officer. Loud shouting from inside. Mr. Thompson chimed in, "I saw Dylan around here a few times. He was with some rough-looking guys once. I saw them standing outside the store like they were watching something." Each word hit me like a hammer. Fury and desperation burned. Dylan. His name kept coming up like a refrain in a tragic song. I wanted to scream, demand answers from every neighbor, but I knew I had to stay calm. The police needed me clear-headed. Jaden needed me strong. Still, a fear was growing like a snarling beast. If Dylan was involved, if he had done something to my parents, I didn't know how I'd face that truth. Matthew called me over, asking more questions about Dylan, where he usually went, his habits. I told him everything, though each word felt like rubbing salt in a wound. "He's addicted to gambling," I said. "He shows up to ask for money. Mom always forgave him, no matter how much he hurt her." Matthew nodded, eyes fixed on his notebook. "We'll start looking into this angle. But you should prepare yourself. This might not be a simple missing persons case." His words sent a shiver through me. I wanted to believe my parents were okay, that this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth was waiting, and it wouldn't be easy. I turned away, heading back to the hospital, where Jaden was. I needed to be with him. I hurried to his bedside. Doctors had been treating him with 4 fluids for hours. He looked slightly better now. His skin was no longer deathly pale, but his eyes still carried a haunting shadow I couldn't forget. "It's Uncle Jack," I whispered gently, touching his hand. "You're okay now." Jaden opened his eyes, those big, round, red-rimmed eyes, locking onto mine. Then, as if a dam of fear had broken, he burst into wrenching sobs. His cries were raw, desperate, as if he'd been holding them in for too long. He reached out with small hands, clinging to me, his fingers gripping my shirt as if afraid I'd vanish. "Uncle Jax, don't go," he whispered, his voice trembling, faint, so fragile I had to fight not to break down with him. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his tiny body tremble. "I'm right here, Jaden." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice catching. But deep down, I knew I was making a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. A doctor came in. "He's more stable now," she said, her tone gentle but serious. "But he suffered severe psychological trauma. We need time to assess him further, and it's best not to pressure him right now." I nodded, but my mind swirled with questions. Jaden knew something. He'd been in that house, had seen something. And though I didn't want to push him, I needed the truth. Detective Matthew arrived shortly after, accompanied by a female officer whose eyes were kind but cautious. They asked about Jaden's condition, then requested to speak with him. "We'll be as gentle as possible," Matthew said. "I know it's not the best time, but anything the boy can tell us might help find your parents." I looked at Jaden, still clinging to me, and felt like I was standing at a dangerous crossroads. I didn't want him to relive whatever had happened. But I also knew it was the only way to find my parents. "Jaden," I said, kneeling by the bed, my voice as soft as possible. "Can you help Uncle Jack a little? These people are police officers, and they want to find Grandma and Grandpa. Can you tell us what happened?" Jaden shook his head frantically, his eyes wide with terror. He clutched his teddy bear tightly, his last shield. No, I don't want to, he whispered, his voice quivering. I hugged him, letting him rest his head on my shoulder. I'm right here, Jaden. You don't have to be scared. Just tell us what you remember. Okay. I won't let anyone hurt you. I could feel his rapid breathing. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to take him away from all this pain, but I couldn't. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. After a few minutes of my reassurance, Jaden began to speak, his voice halting and punctuated by sobs. Dad. Dad came to the house, he whispered, and my heart seemed to stop. Dad came with some other people. They were yelling. Grandma and Grandpa yelled back. Jaden paused, his eyes wide as if reliving the moment. I held his hand, trying to keep my voice steady. Go on, buddy. What did they do? Jaden trembled, tears streaming. Dad, he was really mad. He shouted, told Grandma and Grandpa to give him money, but they wouldn't. Then there was a loud crash. Things broke. He stopped, clutching the teddy bear, his body shaking violently. I was scared. I ran to the wardrobe. I hid. His voice faded, sinking into a memory too heavy to bear. I heard Grandma and Grandpa cry out. Then everything went quiet. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I held Jaden tightly, fighting back tears. Inside, a storm raged. Dylan. He was there. He fought with our parents. The sounds Jaden heard. I didn't dare think further. Matthew and the female officer took quick notes, their expressions hardening. Do you remember anything about the people with your dad? The officer asked, her voice gentle but careful. Jaden shook his head, tears spilling again. I don't know. They were tall. They were scary. Covered in tattoos. He broke into wrenching sobs, clinging to me. I knew he couldn't say more. I signaled to Matthew. He nodded, standing. Thank you, Jaden. You're a brave boy. We have enough to start the investigation, and Dylan will be our primary suspect. The doctor stepped in, gently asking everyone to leave so Jaden could rest. The boy needs time, she said. He's been through too much. I nodded, but inside, I wanted to scream. Dylan. My brother. What had he done? What had he dragged our parents into? And Jaden, an innocent child, had witnessed it all. I sat by Jaden's bed, holding his hand until he fell asleep, his breathing finally steady. But I couldn't rest. Jaden's words were like a sharp puzzle piece, confirming my worst fears. Dylan hadn't just caused trouble. He might have done something unforgivable. Detective Matthew called me the next morning, his voice low and resolute. We've designated Dylan as the primary suspect based on Jaden's statement. We're issuing a manhunt and checking every place he might show up. Do you have any more information about your brother's habits? I recounted what I knew, the casinos Dylan frequented, the dive bars where he drank. Each word felt like a stab, but I couldn't stop. The police moved quickly. They went to the rundown motel room Dylan rented on the outskirts of Reno. But when Matthew called with an update, his voice was heavy with frustration. The room was empty. Trash strewn everywhere, clothes scattered like he left in a hurry. We're collecting fingerprints and any clues we can find. I pictured the room, a chaotic mess reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, a reflection of the person Dylan had become. He'd fled. He knew what he'd done, and he was trying to escape. Meanwhile, I sat by Jaden's side, watching him sleep, his face still etched with fear. The doctor said he needed time, but every time he startled in his sleep, muttering incoherent words, it felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I stroked his hair, whispering, I'm here, Jaden. Everything's going to be okay. But I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or myself. The truth was, I didn't know if things would ever be okay again. The police continued tracking Dylan. They visited casinos and bars where he was a regular. A bartender at the Rusty Nail told Matthew that Dylan had shown up a few days ago, frantic, downing drinks and muttering about needing money fast. He looked like he was being hunted, the bartender said, bloodshot eyes, constantly looking over his shoulder. Then he left without paying. Those details sent a chill through me. Dylan wasn't just running, he was terrified. A key lead came from a creditor named Eddie, a man the police tracked down at a small casino. Eddie, with a gruff voice and cold eyes, Said Dylan owed him tens of thousands from losing streaks. He begged me for more time, Eddie told Matthew. Said he was about to come into big money to pay it all off. Mentioned something about family taking care of it, but I didn't buy it. He looked like a desperate dog. Eddie's words hit me like a hammer. Family taking care of it. What did Dylan mean? Was he planning to get money from our parents? From the grocery store? Or something worse? The police issued a citywide manhunt, extending it to surrounding areas, sending alerts to checkpoints, casinos, cheap motels. News of the case spread like wildfire in our quiet town. Neighbors gathered outside my parents' house, whispering, their eyes a mix of pity and curiosity. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, visited me and Jaden at the hospital, bringing homemade cookies. I can't believe this, Jackson, she said, voice trembling. Joseph and Marilyn were good people. And Dylan. I saw him with some shady characters. I was worried, but I never thought it would come to this. Her words only fueled the fire in my chest. I wanted to scream that I didn't want to believe it, that my brother could do something so horrific. But the pieces were falling into place. Jaden's account, the wrecked house, the neighbors' stories, Eddie's words. They all pointed to Dylan like arrows aimed straight at my heart. I sat by Jaden, holding his hand, feeling his small, cold fingers in my palm. He was still sleeping, but restlessly. Occasionally, he mumbled words like, Dad, don't, or I'm scared. Each whisper cut into me like a blade. I thought about the years Dylan was coddled, defended by Mom, forgiven by Dad. The times I tried to pull him out of his messes, only for him to smirk and say, worry about yourself, Jax. I know how to live my life. Now his way of living had led to this, a destroyed home, a traumatized child, our parents missing. I looked out the hospital window at the moonlight illuminating Reno's rooftops. Somewhere out there, Dylan was hiding, carrying secrets I both yearned and dreaded to uncover. I hoped the police would find him, drag him out of the shadows to face what he'd done. But at the same time, I feared that moment when I faced Dylan. What would I see? A criminal, a brother, or a monster who had destroyed our family? Matthew called again late that night, his voice firm but steady. We're narrowing it down, he said. We've got new leads from the outskirts. We'll find him soon. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you, I said, my voice hollow. I wasn't sure if I was truly ready to face Dylan. The next morning, Matthew called me back to the house. Some findings from the investigation team. We need you to confirm a few details, he said, his voice carrying an odd tone, as if bracing himself for something grave. I didn't ask questions. Just drove over, my heart pounding. When I stepped inside, Matthew was in the living room with another officer, taking photos. The house remained wrecked, cold like a wound that refused to heal. We've done a more thorough search, Matthew said, leading me to the corner where Dad used to work. We found this in the drawer. He handed me a faded yellow envelope, its edges worn. My name was scrawled across it in Dad's handwriting, a script I'd recognize anywhere. Jackson. It read. Just seeing it sent a chill down my spine. I opened the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in panic or fear. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to read. Jackson, our son. The letter began. If you're reading this, things have probably gone too far. We're sorry for everything. We were wrong. So very wrong to let Dylan become what he is. We loved him, but we spoiled him too much, letting him grow into a selfish, broken man. We tried to fix it, but it might be too late. I stopped, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The words cut like a sharp, unrelenting knife. My parents had always defended Dylan, forgiven his mistakes, but hearing them admit their fault in their own handwriting filled me with both pain and anger. I forced myself to read on, each line slicing deeper. Dylan has changed, Jackson. He's no longer the boy we knew. Lately, he's been coming to the house, often demanding money, threatening us. He talked about selling the grocery store, saying it was the only way to settle his debts. We refused, but he wouldn't stop. He brought strangers, men with cold eyes. We've been living in fear, Jackson. We're afraid of the day things go too far. Tears welled up, blurring the words. I thought I was prepared. But no, there was no way to brace for this. My parents had lived in fear, threatened by their own son, and they chose to keep it from me. A wave of anger surged at Dylan, at myself, and even at my parents for letting it come to this. The letter continued, Dad's handwriting growing heavier, as if he knew time was running out. We didn't want to drag you into this, Jackson. You've done so much for this family, carried so much. We didn't want you to face Dylan, didn't want you caught up in this. But if you're reading this, we're probably gone. Take care of Jaden. He's innocent, and please forgive us if you can. I folded the letter, unable to read further. Hot tears fell on my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. The words felt like a final testament, as if my parents knew a tragic end was coming. They'd been pushed to the edge by their own son, and they'd chosen to protect me, no matter the cost. I gripped the letter, feeling it burn in my hand. Matthew stood beside me, his eyes softening, but he said nothing, knowing I needed time to process. Dylan, I whispered, my voice breaking. His name now felt like a curse, an indelible stain. He'd driven our parents to the brink, and I could no longer stand on the sidelines. I handed the letter to Matthew, my voice trembling. Keep it. It's evidence. He nodded, carefully placing it in a clear plastic bag. But his eyes told me he understood this wasn't just evidence, but a piece of my family's tragedy. I returned to the hospital right after, unable to bear another second in that house. Jaden was still sleeping, his face less pale. The letter's words echoed in my mind, each one a reminder of my parents' mistakes and my own. I'd left them alone too long, thinking distance would shield me from Dylan's chaos. But now I couldn't run anymore. Dylan had destroyed our family, and I had to face him, no matter how brutal the truth might be. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Matthew. His voice was curt, but I could hear the tension. We found Dylan, he said. He's at a cheap motel on the outskirts. We've taken him into custody. Would you like to come to the station? My heart pounded, a mix of relief and dread surging through me. They'd found him. I left Jaden at the hospital under the nurse's care, promising to return soon. He clutched my hand, his eyes still filled with panic, but I forced a smile, dry and strained. I'll be back soon, Jaden, I said, ruffling his hair. But as I stepped out, I felt like I was walking into a storm. The Reno police station sat in the heart of town, a gray building with long corridors and the stale smell of old coffee. Matthew met me at the entrance, his expression stern, tinged with exhaustion. He's in the interrogation room, he said, leading me down a narrow hallway. He's rattled, but still denying everything. We need you here to confirm some details. I nodded, though inside, I wanted to turn and run. Not now. Not anymore. The interrogation room was small, with a metal table and stiff chairs. Dylan sat there, facing Matthew and another officer. I stood behind the one-way glass, watching him through the cold pane. He looked haggard, a shadow of himself. His hair disheveled, shirt crumpled, bloodshot eyes suggesting days without sleep. In his hand was a small bag containing cash and fake IDs, clear signs he'd planned to flee. But what chilled me were his eyes, panicked, yet still defiant, as if he thought he could escape. Matthew began, his voice calm but sharp. Dylan, we know you were at your parents' house last week. We have statements from your son, from neighbors, and from a creditor. What did you do? Dylan kept his head down, hands clasped tightly, but his mouth stayed stubborn. I just went to ask for money, he said, his voice weak. We argued, sure, but then I left. I didn't do anything. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms until they stung. He was lying. I knew it. Matthew knew it. The room itself seemed to know it. Matthew didn't flinch. He placed a stack of documents on the table, including my parents' letter and photos of the wrecked house. You sure about that, Dylan? He asked, his voice cold as steel. Jaden said you came with some men. You fought with your parents, and he heard things breaking, loud crashes. How do you explain that? Dylan shifted in his seat, his eyes darting away. The kid's making it up, he muttered, but his voice trembled, as if he knew he was losing ground. Matthew pressed on, his tone sharper. We also have a statement from Eddie, your creditor. He said you promised big money to pay off your debts. Where was that money coming from, Dylan? Your parents' store? Their house? I stood behind the glass, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. Each of Matthew's words was a puzzle piece, forming a horrifying picture. Dylan bowed his head, silent, but I could see his shoulders trembling. He was breaking, and I both wanted to scream at him and run from what I was about to hear. Suddenly, Matthew's phone buzzed. He answered, his calm demeanor instantly replaced by grim focus. He nodded a few times, then hung up. Matthew stood, his voice dropping, each word heavy like a hammer strike. Dylan, I just got a call. The crime scene team found the bodies of Joseph and Marilyn Palmer in a vacant lot not far from their house. Both were brutally attacked. Evidence at the scene matches what we found in the house and Jaden's statement. Do you have anything left to deny? I felt the world stop. Bodies. My parents. I gripped the chair's edge, my head spinning. Their letter, with its trembling words, now became an unbearable truth. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass and grab Dylan, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face without me noticing. Dylan looked up, his face pale as death. No, it wasn't, he stammered, but his voice faltered, as if he didn't believe his own lie. Matthew didn't give him a chance. He slid photos of the crime scene across the table, images I knew I couldn't bear to see, but I knew they were real. Anything else to say, Dylan? Matthew asked, his voice now a razor's edge. Dylan broke down, his sobs echoing in the small room. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. And then, as if his last strength had drained away, he confessed. I didn't mean to, he said, his voice breaking. I just wanted money. I needed it to pay my debts, but they wouldn't give it to me. They yelled, called me a disgrace. I lost control. I hit them. I didn't know what I was doing until they were lying there not moving. My heart tore apart. Dylan, my brother, once Mom's golden boy, had beaten our parents to death. He continued, his voice trembling as if trying to justify his crime. I panicked. I called some guys from the casino. We buried them in the lot. I thought if no one knew, I could sell the store, the house, pay off my debts, and start over. The room was stunned. Matthew kept his face stoic, but I saw his hand tighten around his pen. The officer beside him shook her head as if unable to believe it. And I just stood there, staring at Dylan through the glass. He was no longer my brother. He was the monster who killed our parents, left Jaden in terror, and destroyed everything our family had. I turned away, unable to look any longer. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them. Rage and grief burned together in me, an unquenchable fire. I wanted to scream at Dylan, to demand why he could do this to our own family, but I knew no answer would ease this pain. Matthew stepped out, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Jackson, he said, his voice softer. We'll bring him to justice, and you should prepare to identify your parents' bodies at the morgue. I nodded faintly, my heart empty. I didn't know how to face this loss. My parents were gone, and Dylan, the brother I once knew, had taken them from me. Dylan's trial took place just a few weeks later. I didn't attend. I couldn't face his face, couldn't hear his horrific confession again. Matthew updated me over the phone, his voice steady but laced with empathy. Dylan was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars, paying for the crime he committed. But that sentence didn't bring my parents back, didn't erase the painful memories Jaden carried, and didn't mend the cracks in my heart. I arranged my parents' funeral on a quiet afternoon in Reno. The small church our family used to attend was filled with people, neighbors, friends, regular customers from the grocery store. They came to pay their respects, bringing white chrysanthemums and heartfelt condolences. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, held my hand, tears streaming. Joseph and Marilyn were good people, Jackson. They didn't deserve this. I could only nod, unable to speak, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd break down. The funeral was somber, with only the wind rustling through the cemetery's oak trees and the murmur of prayers. I stood before their graves, feeling like the world had collapsed. But I forced myself to be strong. For Jaden. After the funeral, I knelt before their graves, placing my hand on the cold headstones. "I promise to take care of Jaden like my own son," I whispered. "I won't let him suffer anymore." The wind blew, carrying a strange sense, as if my parents were listening, smiling from somewhere far away. I took Jaden's hand, leading him away from the cemetery. In that moment, I knew this was a promise I would keep at all costs. The first days in Las Vegas weren't easy. Jaden was still haunted. He woke up crying every night, calling for his grandparents. I held him close, singing the lullabies Mom used to sing, though my voice cracked with tears. "I'm here, Jaden," I whispered. "I won't leave you alone." I spent every spare moment with him, playing, telling stories, trying to bring some light back to his eyes, still shadowed by darkness. Slowly, with patience and love, Jaden began to smile again. His smiles were faint, but to me, they were like sunlight breaking through a storm. I decided to sell the grocery store and the house in Reno. Those places held too many painful memories. I couldn't keep them, couldn't let those memories continue to trap us. The money from the sales wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life for Jaden and me. I moved us into a larger apartment in Las Vegas, with a room just for him, where I hung his drawings and placed his worn teddy bear on the bed. In the months that followed, as Jaden and I settled into our new rhythm, I reflected on my family. My parents had made mistakes, spoiling Dylan too much, letting him become selfish and broken. Their favoritism left deep wounds, not just for me, but for them and Jaden too. But I also realized that despite our family's flaws and fractures, love and responsibility were the foundation that held us together. I learned a painful lesson. Blind indulgence and neglect can push a child down a destructive path, even to tragedy. But I also believed that with love and responsibility, I could save a life, Jaden's life. One evening, as the neon lights of Las Vegas lit up the sky, I held Jaden's hand, walking him down a bustling street. He pointed at the lights, giggling at a fountain that changed colors. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt a stillness in my heart. No more nightmares. No more echoes of Dylan's shouts. No more painful memories of Reno. Just me and Jaden, uncle and nephew, walking together under the bright, hopeful glow of this city. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jaden would still have nights when he woke crying, and I would carry the scars of what Dylan did. But I was determined to build a new family, one without violence, favoritism, or betrayal. A family built on love, where Jaden could grow up without fear, where I could keep my promise to my parents and to myself. As we stopped by a fountain, Jaden looked up at me, his eyes sparkling. "Uncle Jax, can I stay with you forever?" he asked, his voice small but full of hope. I knelt down, hugged him, and smiled, though tears welled in my eyes. "Forever, Jaden," I said. "You and me. We're family." Our story closed under the radiant lights of Las Vegas. But in my heart, there was only stillness and resolve. I would not let our family's tragedy repeat. I would give Jaden the life he deserved. And I would honor the true meaning of family, not through blind indulgence, but through love and responsibility. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just for Jaden, but for my parents, who loved us however imperfectly.